So, Daniel, describe and discuss how the toxic masculinity has affected your life as an individual.
Yeah, so I would say that as an individual, I was very lucky to have, I would describe my parents as very progressive. And I would say that they've given me a lot of room to, figure out who I am, figure out how I want to express myself. And I've been very fortunate in that regard. Um, However, outside of my parents, I think um, in our public schools, there's very much a culture from person to person, student to student, even student to teacher sometimes, where you're expected as a man or as a boy to simply kind of just suck it up. So I've been told like, I'd be in elementary school and like I'd be having a really bad day and I might start crying and I've had like, I'll get like made fun of by other students or like a teacher would tell me to just like to man up. And I think that's a fairly common occurrence. Um, and I think lots of guys have that story. And I think a lot of guys also have a story of like, you know, I, even even with me being like fortunate enough to like have parents that are like very open about like, you know, I, they're very against toxic masculinity is how I'll put it very bluntly. But even with that, I've kind of developed like I just I think for like 5 years now. I just haven't cried for like 5 years, like really, really cried for like 5 years.
Hmm.
And it's by no means like like my parents' fault or anybody else in my life's fault. It's simply like a cultural thing that one day it just kind of stopped.
Hmm.
And I definitely like think that that's a symptom of toxic masculinity. And I think it for a lot of individuals because they don't have that outlet of, I can express myself through crying or just by being open about my feelings, they instead turn to like some other method of expressing themselves or just bottling it up that's just unhealthy.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. So, for this next question, I want both of you guys to kind of chime in from the perspective of a person that identifies as a male and a person that identifies as a female. So, describe and discuss how toxic masculinity has affected your family, your friends around you, or just maybe like the college community that you're in.
Yeah, so I think I touched on this a little bit with my previous response, but um, yeah, like as I said, a lot of students that I've been with and a lot of friends that I've interacted with have that exact same story of being told like this is what a man is. A man doesn't cry. A man like doesn't show emotion. A man's just strong constantly. Um, I remember specific stories, especially from my brother. He's just 4 years older than me, and he already has like way more stories of how toxic masculinity affected him because when he was growing up and when he was going through middle school, um, he he had a very like he was himself. His favorite color is pink. He's very loud. He loves to be an entertainer. He's very comfortable in who he is.
Hmm.
But that version of who he is isn't necessarily what you would define as like the most masculine person, like strong. Like he breaks that stereotype, and it's not that he's like aligning to like he is a guy. He's very much a male, but he likes what he likes.
Hmm.
Um, and he caught a lot of flack for that, especially in middle school. For a while, like he totally just changed his favorite color to like
Hmm.
something he just straight up didn't like. Um, so I know that like for my family and for lots of my friends, it's definitely affected them. It's definitely like an ever-present spirit in their lives. So.
Yeah. So like Madeline, from the perspective of a woman, like guy friends that you have, or maybe even your dad, like in your family or other men in your family, like how do you view toxic masculinity through the eyes of a woman?
I would say that growing up in Louisiana, it's definitely like more conservative there, and it's like a lot of the communities are more religious, like just kind of that white picket fence type family. And so I think there's definitely an idea of what a man should be, and it's not necessarily like, oh, they'll get like violent with you or anything, but it's more just there's expectations, and if you don't meet them, then people will treat you differently, or there's kind of like this judgment or like talking behind people's backs about that person. And for like my dad specifically, I think it also kind of ties in with him being Asian just because like it was a source of like bullying when he was growing up. And so I think toxic masculinity kind of like fuels that. And it also like it impacts you as you're growing up as like a boy to like a man. But I think it also is like going from like being a man to like a father. And that's where it's really starting to impact like daughters and wives and children. And so I would say like my dad doesn't have any like toxic masculinity, but there's definitely those influences that have shaped like who he is and how he presents himself and like how he chooses to express his feelings and like how to behave just in general. And so I would say that's mainly where I kind of like pick up on hints of it, but it's not something that deeply affects me, I would say like every day.
Hmm. So in like our society, when you do see like, as a woman, like when you do see men that are kind of like breaking the stigma, like showing emotion or maybe doing something that is considered more feminine, do you view them as less of a man, if that makes sense?
I wouldn't say I view them as less of a man. I think I like will respect however they identify and like however they're trying to present themselves. But I also think it's like people will be like, oh, if you cry, you're more emotional, like you're more feminine. But there's masculinity and femininity within like all gender presentations. So I wouldn't view them as less of a man. I feel like if you're in touch with your emotions, that's just who you are.
Hmm. And I know we're kind of circling the topic around toxic masculinity and, like showing emotion isn't considered being masculine and all this kind of stuff. But I want to touch a little bit on the topic of toxic femininity and how that's kind of impacted our society. So toxic femininity, we've seen the effects of it mainly in body image of women, how like we've seen models and people, especially in the media, are made to look. And we've seen this effect on young girls. Like a lot of girls are becoming anorexic, bulimic, a lot of eating disorders. So, how do you think toxic femininity has not only impacted your personal life, but impacted like the societal standard of being a woman?
Um, I would, I mean, I think just being like in a society that kind of has those issues, I feel like there's just a culture like for women. And I would definitely say, like, I'm gonna be honest, I compare myself to like other women around me all the time. Like, I think it's just like a culmination of influences growing up that's just the way I think. And it's not like I'm intentionally doing it, but I kind of like there's this drive to want to be, I guess, better or like make myself feel better by kind of dragging other women down in my head. And it's like, I mean, I'll admit it, it's kind of messed up, but it's just something that I've developed because there's like social media, and with that, all these people are like editing their images and like it's trendy to look this way and not this way. And like there's just expectations that like you want to meet, even if it's not someone forcing you to do it.
Hmm. So, like, obviously, through your description, we see like the negative impacts of our societal standards in masculinity and femininity. So, one final question I have for both of you is how do you feel that we can work together, all genders, men, women, non binary folks, all the other genders? How can we work together to lessen the effects or eliminate the effects of toxic masculinity in our community?
Um, so I think we're doing a lot of action as it stands about like at least on my social media feed I see a lot of like, oh, watch out for like these signs of toxic masculinity. This is what we need to be doing better. This is what we need to be doing differently. And I think we need to continue that. But I think we what we really need is a culture shift of when we're in person and we're talking with other people, like our friends or family, and somebody makes a comment that like kind of aligns with toxic masculinity, there needs to be a culture of being unafraid to call that out. Because
Hmm.
I've seen it from my friends all the time that like they have an idea of what a man is, and somebody kind of like breaks out a little bit and they make a comment about it. And they need to be called out for that because toxic masculinity is hurting them just as much as it hurts the person they're making the comment about. And so I think really developing that in-person culture of like calling it out as you see it would create a really, really big shift. Because as it stands, I think just through social media alone, a lot of people are aware of it and it gets called out online because we have like a mask to hide behind. Um, but in person, people are a lot more scared and a lot more they're not as willing to call it out as they see it, especially if it's somebody that they really care about and somebody that they don't want to lose respect for.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I think especially for men, and acknowledging that toxic masculinity exists, because I think it's definitely a stigma among men to like deny it and be like, no, like this is making our society worse. Men are becoming less masculine, as we've seen like in a lot of like headlines. Like men are becoming less masculine. Toxic masculinity is made up by the woke party and all this stuff. So I think acknowledging that it exists, especially among men, is definitely a great first step in taking. Madeline, if you have any thoughts about how we can work together from your perspective, how would you go about that?
I agree with a lot of what Daniel said, just having like accountability and like it might seem like such a huge task to like tackle this issue within like our whole society, but I mean, within each friend group, you have the opportunity to kind of set the culture, even if it's like small. And so if you just keep spreading that around, hopefully this like ring of influence grows.
Hmm.
So
All
yeah.
right, so that's all the questions I have for y'all. So yeah,